who got busted stealing a car and he drove it over state lines. The FBI then recruited him, and William O'Neill would go on to actually draw out a chart where the Panther leaders slept and give it to the FBI agent, and they would then come in using that floor plan drawn by William O'Neill and assassinate the cop. The way that the informers worked is that they're used to destroy the organization because they get engaged in crime. Bobby Seale tells the story of what he calls the jackanapes. And the jackanapes were essentially, they were the lumpen. They were people who were made their living by preying on other members of the black community. And some of them feigned like they had been transformed and they joined the Panthers. So Bobby Seale says that they're driving a truck with the Black Panther, you know, the Panther pose on the truck, and Black Panther Intercommunal News Service, and they're driving between LA and San Francisco, and they stop and rob a gas station. Then they get back in the truck, big white truck with the Black Panther on it, and drive on to the Panther headquarters. So the jackanapes, they did those kinds of things, which helped give the image that the Panthers were a criminal organization. They set up leaders. They took money, diverted funds. That's what they did. That's a different sector. This level of collaborator. When you talk about the politicians and those people who move up, they're not necessarily engaged at that lower level. They're cutting deals, and let's be honest, in the case of some of these people, and I'll use this metaphor, have you seen The Birth of a Nation?
No, not yet.
Okay, well there's a slave butler in The Birth of a Nation, and what he attempts to do is that he wants to get as few people whipped as possible, so whatever the master says, he tries to get folks to comply with, because in his heart, there's no possibility of resistance, we can't win, so he just wants you to go along with it and accommodate. Okay? Have you seen Django?
Yes.
Okay, well, Stephen in Django,
Samuel Jackson.
Stephen is a greater defender of the master interest than the master. Okay? So those types of distinctions have to be made. A lot of these politicians, they intend to do well, but they have no comprehension of the way in which the capitalist structure works. And in some cases, it comes down to things as simple as this. Cities used to have real power. They used to control their own utilities. They used to have control of water, right? In the early 20th century, you had something like 25 cities that were governed by socialists. Okay? Cities used to be real powerful. At some point in the 1950s and 60s, there's a shift, and the corporations gain much greater power in the decision making. And you can see that, so that now cities are in positions, right? Think about it. Sports teams, not only did they used to bear the name of the city, they used to be owned by the cities. Okay? That transformation where capital now has much greater power than does municipal government has put a number of people in position. So black people become mayors at the moment in which the corporations, these capitalists have a greater power relationship than do municipal governments, and they use municipal governments as simply a bank to be robbed. And so to some degree, I would suggest that people like Coleman Young tried to bend the stick as best they could in the interest of black folk, but there were structural constraints. Now some of these cats are outright crooks, right? But they're in a constrained situation. And I know that's a long answer, but that's the best I can do.
My question is, you guys mentioned the FBI and a counterintelligence program, and you mentioned 3 steps that they go through, to detain, crush, and raise the moderates. But recently, we've been seeing after all these demonstrations, there's been a big buildup, connection between the police and the military, a big buildup of military equipment from the Middle East. They use excuses, Homeland Security needs it for terrorists. but generally, they've been using all this military weaponry against us, in recent years. So my question is the first two steps of that counterintelligence policy apply, contain, crush, or forget the moderates, and just have a scorched earth policy, with this equipment. One day, one morning, we may wake up and then they perform a blitzkrieg like they did in Germany and just go all wild. We already have white gun owners that are already deputized with stand your ground law. Gives them permission to kill us and get away in court. So now that we have the military buildup, also with that infamous organization called Blackwater instructing, the military is infiltrate police force, and it's more military than police. So do you think one day we will wake up and it will be a scorched earth policy, because they're just taking pot shots at us right now? We're getting killed far at will. So what do you think about that?
I assume that's a question for all.
All of you answer it.
We can't project on something like that. We can't project on something. I'm sorry. We can't project on something like that. I mean, you don't know what's going to happen in terms of which direction the federal government is going to go. We're in the middle of it. We've got an election next Tuesday, which is critical in terms of domestic as well as international, policy. I think that this is not something that's new. After '67, they began to build up, militarization in and around Detroit and giving them, more firepower. This happened in most of the cities. Anything is possible. Human beings are, if there's one thing, you're unpredictable. If you consider World War II, the way that they rounded up and incarcerated, the Japanese Americans and took all of their property and all of their value and kept it. Or go even further back when you deal with the Trail of Tears, the removal of Native Americans onto reservations in order to acquire lands that they wanted at that particular moment. Anything is possible, but I can't see into the future. But let's say we certainly don't hope so.
Yeah, I just don't want to interrupt, but I just look through history. You had Black Wall Street, where they did use military ordinance against the people in Black Wall Street. One of the most successful communities in America was American Holocaust. They used planes to bomb buildings and neighborhoods, and that was 95 years ago.
Yeah, but I'm just saying, and we're gonna have to move on to the next question. We can't predict what's gonna happen in that sense, and one certainly would hope not.
Let me say this as clearly as possible. I think Dr. Bard has made it clear that we can't predict, but we can look at trends, right? And the trends suggest this. We've suffered under two forms of violence: private violence, meaning that by white citizens, and state-sponsored violence, meaning police, military. It seems to me that when I look at the numbers of black people killed by police has been dropping the last 2 years. And it's been dropping because of our mass resistance and exposure. White citizenry is primed. They've been, conceal and carry, open carry, stand your ground, all of these things. And I think gun ownership, right after Obama was elected, within 6 months, there have been something like a 4,000% increase in gun ownership by whites. I would look not at the state for the kind of things you're talking about, but I would look at white citizens. And to drop one other thing, there is a group of generals who believe that any use of the U.S. military on domestic soil, unless the federal government is in imminent threat of falling, is unconstitutional, and that president should be impeached. So this thing is a little more complex than we think.
And just to close up, that's why we need to get organized. And so when I talked about the people who've been in rebellion, they haven't really been organized, right? If we want to have any capacity, if that is an option, the best way we can deal with it is first being organized in our communities, having united fronts, and organizing and touching people who we generally don't touch and organize, right? So even, and when I talked about boycotts, I talked about civil disobedience, but Melba also talked about the strike, right? For those of us who still working in critical parts of production, we do have capacity to, even if it is a state, to challenge. And I think in our communities, we need to start preparing our youth. That's why I was glad that this program started out with young people, right? Mm-hmm. And so in our communities, are we preparing our young people to just have an awareness of security and defense, right? Are we developing the capacity, if there is such a crisis or emergency, that we can eat? You know, so we can't predict it. I would agree with that, but we do need to be prepared. And so, and that starts with us being, not only being more aware, but to begin to organize. I started with talking about Chokwe Lumumba, and what they did in Jackson to begin to organize a broader group of people than who we usually say the usual suspects, is in his community. When he ran for city council, they organized the People's Assembly, which included everybody that was in his ward. And so we got to begin to touch more people, right? And talk to more people and get organized and build out of that defense networks and things of that nature to protect our communities.
Yeah, I just want to make one comment, and then this young lady should be allowed to ask her question. We're also looking at the browning of America. Mm-hmm. A lot of those acts that have happened in the past, we were a significant minority.
Right.
And in the same way that people are being primed, there's a lot of madness out there now as a consequence of Trump's campaign. And they're the ones who are like all in, mm-hmm. you know. However, it's also mobilizing the Latino community, mm-hmm. it's organizing the Black community to become more aware. And so a lot of those things occurred because we were at such a severe disadvantage. And so they're not necessarily so brave when they have to deal with a much more significant population.
Not to mention having allies globally.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, so we have to not only think in terms of the domestic United States, we have to think in terms of the world.
Mm-hmm. Ask your question, because we're going to...
My question is directed to Dr. Umoja. I'm sorry, I mispronounced your name.
No, you were great.
Thank you. Okay. Movement heard if you disrupt. I have a hard time when I see the television reports and in our own communities, we're tearing up our own communities. How can you, I guess, get the masses to boycott and do other ways aside from destroying cars and storefronts in their own communities? Because I don't see that movement and that disruption is productive. So how can we be productive with the boycotts and disruption?
And when I mean by disruption, Montgomery bus boycott. That's stop business as usual. If you can't stop business as usual, we don't have no team.
Amen.
So we have to be able to stop business as usual. I do think we need to be more organized and sophisticated. And through that organization, you can do that. But it takes, it doesn't happen overnight though. It's gonna be some patient building like in your neighborhood type building. And so some of that is not only like calling for, wait until somebody gets shot, but how are we gonna eat? How are we gonna educate these children in our neighborhoods? Developing relationships with our neighbors, but also beginning to, politicize people to other possibilities, right? So I think it could be done. We just need to start at square one, start with some basics in our communities and with our neighbors. And yes, that's, like I said, I grew up in 65 and Watts and saw stuff burning down, stuff like that. On the other hand, in all struggles internationally, if you look at South Africa, you look at Palestine, if you look at Vietnam, it ain't pretty. It's not pretty, and sometimes that happens, but we have to prepare ourselves for those eventualities. I think the conditions that created these uprisings we talked about today, they exist today probably exponentially. They're gonna, and so until we get organized, it's still gonna happen, right? Like we've had Ferguson, right? We had Baltimore. They're still gonna happen. And so until we begin to do the type of organizing we need to do in our communities, people who are unorganized, that's what they're gonna do because the conditions still exist. Now, I think King came to that conclusion, right? And that's why he made that statement, so we're there until we get organized.
Yeah, thank y'all for y'all time and y'all knowledge. My question is, of these mostly white supremacists that infiltrated the police agencies around the country, in y'all's opinion, about how credible, about how deep is that infiltration of these supremacists that are in the police?
It's an FBI report. But even before the FBI did it, I think that, the history of the police as an organization, they began in the South as slave patrol. And they've always had, Detroit is one of the classic cases that if you were to have done an analysis of police officers in the 1960s in Detroit, in 1967, the year of rebellion, the majority of those white police officers would have been Southerners.
That's true for LAPD.
Yeah.
Also, they were known for recruiting members of the Klan. So this is not like recent. This is sort of the history of the way that a lot of these police departments, in particular Detroit, evolved.
And it's a lot of police departments have these histories of having white supremacist organizations right inside the police department. Even before we got the FBI report, they confirmed that. Even if you, what's the OJ case? I'm not saying whether he was guilty or innocent, but Mark Furman was a part of a white supremacist organization, a Nazi organization within the LAPD. So it's historic, and it still has a tradition today. What we do need to have is the black folks in these organizations to get organized, right? And to support the movement. I just saw, my daughter sent me the other day online, she also, where we had 2 officers in Standing Rock who resigned because in solidarity with the movement there. So we need to politicize these people in the police department.
Yeah, actually there was actually a police officer on Detroit Police, Detroit Police, who had to resign because of an unsavory comment that he made on social media. So in terms of, my limited experience and information on our police chief, I think he's doing a really good job of demonstrating that the police have to have a relationship to the community and that they serve the community. So it can be done. It depends on the leadership and how these policemen, are being trained. But it's not infiltration. They were just who they were.
It's a police culture. I train police officers from around the state of Illinois, and I proudly participated in training 300 police officers. And I want to be clear, we do, we have to take pen and pencil tests, something called the COBRAs, that measures the extent to which they believe in colorblindness, i.e. that racism no longer exists. We have to take psychological tests in terms of systematic racism, and we look at the results. And so I can tell you 2 things. One, police officers, those people who come to policing, are generally more racist coming in the door than people who go into other occupations. I can tell you 2, police culture is extraordinarily racist. The policies that they construct are designed to target our community. And the third piece is this. Even if they were not personally racist, the role the police are asked to play in this society is to protect property. We're propertyless. Or I should say, we're not propertyless, but you know. And so the very role that they're asked to play requires them to do social control on us. That puts them in conflictual situations with us, and they come to it with all of the fears and hatred of the racists. And so because they have greater contact with us, right, because they already have these ideas and because of the policies that are structured, you're going to, I don't know how you get away from that until you make fundamental change. We can do some things with training, right? We can do some things with, leadership makes a difference. In my community, we forced them to hire a local black guy as the police chief, and I can say that he put a muzzle on them. But they're constantly you gotta pull them.
Dr. Gregory?
Fine, thank you. I have a brief question for each of the three of you that carries on with that forwards the remarks you've made already. For the first speaker, how would you describe the prevailing strategies today involving the corporate structure? Are they the same as you described before, or have there been changes and more sophistication in how they handle music, color? For the second speaker, how do those of us who really agree with your characterization of the need for organization of the community, how do we get it going now? Which organization have to take the lead? How do those of us who are activists in our own community get that going, first in our own local communities and with a national tie? And for the third speaker, you mentioned the change in the United States, demographic structure, the browning of the community. And I think you're suggesting that African Americans and Hispanics and Native Americans need to get together because their interests are interlinked. But I wonder if there's another group, and that group is the progressive part of the American Jewish community, because some of the racist provocateurs hate them as much as they hate African Americans. So I wonder if you should add to the browning of America that additional element. Thank you.
Great questions. I would say that the policy that I described is something that probably began to be unraveled with the election of Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan and neoliberalism launches a new nadir for African American people, and we can see it initially in that in the 60s and 70s there was a move to incorporate black people at all levels, except for top corporate leadership, into the corporations. Right? We were actually increasing employment in that moment.
Right.
Since the 80s, what we've seen is the marginalization of the black working class from labor. We've seen the sub-proletarianization of black folks, people working part-time jobs, working jobs without benefits. We've also seen in the last 10 years, black student enrollment has actually been going down, right, at the elite campuses. Okay? The portion that's to the community colleges.
Right.
So that means that they're not as interested in building a black technical managerial class. They've also begun to eviscerate affirmative action. Well, affirmative action basically doesn't exist anymore, right? So clearly incorporation is no longer the major move. If you look at residents, there's higher levels of apartheid today than there was in 1970.
Right.
The destruction of public housing, the pushing of black people into suburban areas, or pushing them further down into areas where you didn't used to have a large black population. All of these things are policies of exclusion. So they're the exact opposite of what I was talking about was corporate liberal policy.
Right.
We're now dealing with draconian, revanchist policies.
Very good, thank you.
Well, I'm a member of the Malcolm X grassroots movement, but I'm not going to tell you that's the solution. I don't believe any one organization is the solution. But what we are proposing is, and that's why I mentioned the example of what was done in Jackson when Chauffeur first ran for city council in terms of forming a People's Assembly. So in other places, we're looking at that model and trying to build it, a People's Assembly. So in Oakland, they've begun with a series of assemblies called the State of Black Oakland. In February in Atlanta, we're going to have the State of Black Atlanta to begin to, regardless of what your ideology is, what your what part of town you live in or whatever, we're going to come together and have conversations to try to form a common agenda.
Okay.
And so, and the piece we're looking at, and it might not be the same as Jackson, because Atlanta is different from Jackson, right? And Detroit is different from Atlanta, right? But we can have a conversation on a local level and then come up with a consensus of what's the agenda for our people in a particular place. And some of that will be focused on the electoral level, but some of that will be, as they did in Jackson, well, what can we do to help organize the youth in our community? What can we do to start building some cooperative economic